All right, so welcome back to another episode or another podcast of the Uneducated and Untrained Pastor, where it is permissible to use double negatives here, and it's just for us, double negatives are just a point of emphasis. So,
Or a bad business meeting.
could be a bad bad business meeting. So, well, today we've got something really good. I got Pastor Harold Smith in from Van Buren, Arkansas today. Thought he'd come over here to Bow Legs and just hang out. We just got through eating some Mexican food, so that was pretty good. Everything was good there, and it's going to be another podcast. Now we kind of both use the term unscripted, but I've actually kind of gone to it's unrehearsed, just so he can have unscripted and I'll just have unrehearsed. So, but we both kind of do this. We just get together and we just talk about just whatever comes up. So. Now, with that being said, we do maybe have a topic or two that we might talk about. With that being said, I'm going to let Harold Smith, I'm just going to let him introduce himself, tell you about his ministry, what he does, what he's been doing for about the last 2 years or so, and we'll just go from there. So, Harold, tell him
Ronnie, thanks for having me at the Bowlegs Multimedia Studios. It's certainly good to be here amongst you and your staff. Yep. And my name is Harold Smith. I am a missionary out of West Park Baptist Church in Ozark, Arkansas. I work with struggling churches. I work with churches that are can't find a pastor, can't keep a pastor. Some of them don't even want a pastor. And so it's kind of a church revitalization work. I also have a ministry where I try to encourage pastors and preachers by holding fellowships and conferences and training seminars. And then the last thing I do is I have a free Christian bookstore in downtown Van Buren. We're open Saturdays 9 to 5. We give away free Christian literature. We give it to anybody that comes in, and we have books, all different kinds. Gives us an opportunity to talk to people, put a good Christian literature in their hand, and it's just a way of doing evangelism and strengthening up the believers.
Yeah, and I've been to your store. It's really neat.
Ron, you're my book czar. Anything that's out of line, unacceptable, somebody that went woke after they wrote their book, Ron points that out and tells us whether it's acceptable or not.
Well, at least on some of them. I'll see some authors. I won't give no names right now, but I'm like, man, I don't think I'd have that in here. But yeah, sometimes, that's why it's good to have friends all around, because we don't keep up with everything. So, okay, I'm going to let you give your perspective. From your recollection, how did we first meet? How long have we known each other now?
I don't know.
I don't either. I'm going to say probably
there was an association meeting in Perry County, the Perry County Conway Perry Baptist Association. A friend of ours, Alan Nelson, put that on. He was somebody in that association back when he was Southern Baptist, and they had a conference, and you were sitting in front of me.
Yep.
And I think Alan or somebody called on me to pray. And they said, want Harold Smith to open us up in prayer. And you turned around and said, and I started praying and you recognized my voice, I think.
Yeah.
And so you said, so you're Harold Smith. I've heard you or heard about you, but I've never met you. We met and I invited you to our Preachers of Grace conference, and you said you would come and you didn't. You stood us up. And then I encountered you a second time in Lawton, Oklahoma. And I said, hey, I thought you were coming to our conference and you never showed. And so you rededicated your life to coming to the conference, and you showed up after the second invite.
Now wait, let me explain the first invite. I wanted to come, but here was the problem. The next day, on Monday, we were flying out for Ireland. And that was the reason, because me and my wife were going to go, and it was like there was no way with everything we had to get going, So that was the reason. I don't know if you could call it a good one or not. Knowing me, I'd have came by myself, no doubt. But no, I did get to come to the last 3 Preachers of Grace conferences.
Yeah, well, that was we haven't had one in probably 3 years.
Yeah.
So I knew you a year before. So I've probably known you for 7 years then.
Yeah, something like that. Now, the first time that I heard about you, J.D. Hall had it was like an internet radio, it's like sermon
Voice
thing.
in the Wilderness Radio.
Yeah, boy, yeah. I don't even remember how I came about that. I stumbled onto it. Somebody might have sent me a link or something. And I guess he would just have a handful of sermons, like 3 or 4 sermons, and they would just be on a loop.
He had a different preacher each hour.
Okay, is that what it was?
Yeah, and so like every like Central Time, I'm making something up. I don't remember the exact schedule. It was like Paul Washer preached at 7 o'clock in the morning. Phil Johnson preached at 8 o'clock in the morning.
Okay.
I preached at 9 o'clock in the morning, and Earl Blackburn preached at 10 o'clock in the morning. And JD had this kind of, he would have like a big name guy and then a nobody, a big name guy and then a nobody, and then he had times where he would just play for hours just unknown preachers that he knew of.
Okay.
That the idea was to take people that were unknown
Right.
and put them out there, and he gave me a daily slot. And I was in between Paul Washer and Phil Johnson, or somebody who was well known every day.
Yeah.
And a lot of people. I ended up meeting a lot of people through that, both around the states, and I remember making friends with some people from Australia through that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, for me, like I said, it wasn't like somebody said, "Hey, listen to Harold Smith." It was just here's this voice in the wilderness thing, and I click on it, and it just so happened to be Harold Smith. Now, here was the problem, though. It had your name, but it didn't say where you were from or anything, so I had no clue. But I just remember listening to the sermon, thinking, "Man, this guy can preach," And matter of fact, some of the things you were bringing out, I was like, "Good day, where's he?" I mean, when I say where's he getting that, where's he coming up with that? Not in a negative way, but I was like, "How did he dig that out of there?"
Yeah.
So yeah, and then somewhere after that, I think a friend of mine, you know him too, Randy Tyler. I think he told me that he had gone to the Preachers of Grace.
He came
conference.
to one of the very early meetings, maybe the second or third year, and we held that for 11 years. We held it.
Yeah.
Randy came to 1 year, and then he never came back. He said he was coming back, but he just never responded. I never had any more contact with Randy. And so I never heard back from him.
Yeah. Well, one thing about Randy, I'm surprised you got the first one because, man, that guy is a homebody. I mean, that's just his nature, Now, me, I'm pretty much the opposite. I like to go. I like to meet new people, and which he does too, but, But I think that's where I heard about it. And then, thank the Lord I got to go to the last 3. I think I preached in the middle one of those. And so, yeah, that was really good, So that's kind of how we met. But so let me see. You're what, 50, 51 now?
I just turned 50
And when did you start preaching?
when I was 31.
31. So you've been preaching 30 or 20 years?
Almost 20.
Yeah, almost 20.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
almost 20.
And
I took the long way into the ministry. I went down every other road that dead ended, and then finally decided, okay, I'll do this. And I knew I had a call. I sensed a call to the ministry early on in my life. I really felt a desire to teach the Word of God, understand the Word of God, preach the Word of God. I had those desires. I just didn't think I had the capabilities. I can remember writing some articles that I never published or really shared with anybody.
yeah.
I can remember being asked to teach Sunday school, and teaching a Sunday school class. And then they were like, "Man, you should have your own class." And I was like, "No, we need to find another church. I'm not hanging around here. They're going to make me do something."
Yeah.
And I had a couple of sales jobs that I had worked, and I was very good at sales. Not like new customer sales, but like where I had an account or a route, or I had customers. I had very good customer service.
Yeah.
And I learned how to deal with people. And in doing that, I was able to, I learned how to deal with people. I learned how to work a job and be, I learned how to be accountable. And I just learned how to deal with people. All of that paid big dividends when I became a pastor and had to deal with Baptists. I figured if I could deal with these crotchety old business owners, dealing with a Baptist wouldn't be that bad. And so it wasn't time wasted, it was time well spent. And then all I really needed to learn, knowing how to deal with people, knowing how to lead people,
Yeah.
all I really needed to learn how to do was prepare and craft sermons.
Oh yeah.
And to this day, I don't believe preaching is something that's taught. I believe it's something that's caught. I don't think you teach people how to preach. I think it's something they either have or they don't.
No,
I think you can make some
yeah.
preachers better, but I've seen guys go to seminary, have a master's degree in preaching, and I'd rather listen to someone rake their nails down a chalkboard than hear them try to make sense out of the scriptures.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that 100%. You know, I've gone to a couple of preaching seminars, you know, and I mean, I didn't go to try to learn how to preach. To be honest, I usually just went just to fellowship with other preachers
Yeah.
and such, just meet people. Now, I did glean some things, you know, even
Sure.
Steve Lawson, you know, who's kind of fallen off things lately, but I remember he was telling about, he said, sometimes, you know, or the way he explained it was, he said, like, preaching is like taking off in a jet. You know, you go on and you start building up speed and you take flight. And he said, you know, sometimes he said he would hit peak altitude immediately. And his point was, he said, when you do that, he says, nothing stands out. The emphasized point. Here's what was funny. I could relate to all the mistakes, you know. I thought, well, at least I kind of have a title for that. But I've been to H.B. Charles, who I like to hear him preach too. And what I really loved about him was somebody asked him, they said, so how far in advance are your sermons ready? And he goes, well, brother, when I walk up there, it's done. You know, he said, very rarely is it ever finished, you know. He said, but I'm running out of time, you know.
Yeah.
And I thought that was kind of funny because I thought I can relate to that one for sure. But
I think what ends up happening is preachers teach people how to preach like them. And what you really need to learn is how to preach the way God's gifted you.
Yep.
Some guys are better at the languages. I would put MacArthur in that. You know, he'll tell you this Greek word is used XXX, and you can sit down and look all that stuff up. But if you're basically a backwoods hillbilly like me, and I'm up lecturing people on Greek words and Hebrew words, in reality, I'm just saying, hey, I read a bunch of books, or I got my concordance out and looked this up. And so it would be kind of disingenuous for me to get up and lecture on a Greek word, whereas MacArthur, you're not going to hear him share a lot of real world examples where I would be pretty heavy on application and real world example. And that's not to say MacArthur's doing it right and I'm doing it wrong or vice versa. I think if you just read a sermon by Peter, read a sermon, you know, read Paul, read John. There were different styles of preaching.
Right.
They all conveyed gospel truth. They were all biblically accurate and were honored and empowered by the Holy Spirit, but the approach was totally different.
Yeah, and I like you sharing all that because, you know, this podcast is really for the uneducated and untrained pastor, which simply means they've either had no formal education and training or very little, you know, and not that there's a lot of guys that listen to this, but there's some preachers that do listen, and I think it's helpful for them to hear that because I was talking to one of my co-elders the other day. He's our youngest elder, Nathan Cross, and he told me this. He said one of the biggest things you told me about preaching was don't try to be anybody else.
Yeah.
Just be yourself, you know.
Yeah.
Listen, I mean, I love to hear you preach, but one Harold Smith's all we need, you know.
Yeah, really.
You know, I mean,
I'm
John
so
MacArthur.
bad the imitation would be even worse. I mean, my goodness. I've never seen an Elvis impersonator I really liked, but I never got to see the King in person either. So
Yeah.
I can't imagine a backwoods Baptist impersonator, how bad that would be.
Yeah, you know, and the thing of it is I've told people this before. I said, listen, whatever God has called you to do, nobody can do that better than you.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that you're the best preacher. It doesn't mean any of those. But where God has led and sent you and called you to do it. I mean, do it with the confidence that God is the one that is
I was
leading
talking
you.
to a pastor last month an elder in a church. I don't think he'd mind me sharing this. I'll just go ahead and use his name. Robbie Alexander down at Beryl Baptist, where Wade Lentz is the preaching pastor there. Robbie is an elder there, and Robbie was preaching and Wade was critiquing him. And Robbie's a mechanic by trade. That's what he's done his whole life. He's a great mechanic. And Wade was trying to help him become a better preacher. And he said, all right, Robbie, no more mechanic stories. Well, if you're a mechanic, that's your best illustration.
Yeah.
You know, if you're a golfer, you're going to tell golfing stories.
Yeah.
If you are a crappie fisherman, you're going to... And I would say, no, if Robbie gets a chance, and I love Wade and I love Robbie, but Robbie needs to tell mechanic stories. Because they get Wade every Sunday. Occasionally, they're going to get somebody that's going to tell mechanic stories. That's okay. That's the diversity of backgrounds that are used in delivering these messages. And I think that's important. I just feel like Christ was the supreme example. And he talked about farming. He talked about fishing. He talked about spinning clothes. He talked about all of these things. And the idea was he was relating to a broad group of people.
Yeah.
And we should have that same desire.
Well, it's like, you know, even here when I was at Sovereign Grace, everybody will talk about, they'll say, you're either going to hear firstborn stories or you're going to hear Montana stories, you know. And it's true. I mean, you know, we lived in Montana when I'm in my firstborn days. And, so there's a lot of the things that I experienced that
I've heard
those years.
I've heard their critique of pastors where they said, you know, whatever his last town was, let's just say it was Atlanta, and his sermon would be the Atlanta Times. Basically, it was whatever happened back in Atlanta where he was. You know, and you can wear out illustrations. I could be guilty of that. But at the same time, I have found there are people that wouldn't fit in other churches that say, man, I love here because your sermons are so relatable. The best compliment I was ever given was by a pastor in Michigan named Terry Basham. You may know Terry.
I've heard the name.
T.L. Basham, Terry Basham. This is what he said, and I this is the greatest compliment I've ever been given. He said, Harold Smith puts the cookies on the bottom shelf where everybody can reach them.
That's a good one.
I was like, man, that's my life goal. Let's get those cookies up here where only the educated and the intellectual are getting it. No, let's put them down here where the dumbest among us can still reach in there and get them.
Yeah.
And so when Terry said that, and I think he said it on Twitter, I don't know, 5 or 6, maybe 8, 10 years ago. He may not even believe that anymore. He may be like, that's stupid, Harold. I wish I'd never said that. But in my mind, that was the greatest compliment I'd ever received because that is the goal of the preacher.
Right.
He's to take the Word of God and put it in the people's language in everyday terms that they can understand. This is why we had a Protestant Reformation. You had preachers up there in the Catholic Church speaking Latin.
Yeah.
Talking about things nobody understood.
Didn't even know the language.
Didn't even know the language. Didn't want a Bible in their own language. Well, now we've got Reformed preachers that came out of the Protestant Reformation, and they're talking over the top of everybody's head.
Yeah.
I'm like, dude, you've gone full circle.
You know, it's funny you say that. The other day I took my son Dustin. Tanner was gone for the weekend, and a couple other boys, Bryce and Malachi Leahy. I took them mountain bike riding. Well, on the way back, we're talking, and I was talking to Bryce. He's like 16 years old, and I said, listen, preaching is kind of a thing where, I said, think about this. When you go to school, you've got first grade, second grade, all these grades.
Mm-hmm.
I said, but when you go to church, I said, it would be like, when you're preaching, it's like taking kindergarten all the way to 12th grade, and you're teaching everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, so when you preach, some of my people are going to be more grounded, more mature, more educated, and they're going to be up here on their understanding. And then I'll have new Christians down here. I said, I'm preaching one sermon, and it has to edify this guy, and it has to strengthen and build up that one. And I said, and here's the biggest point of it. I said, that's when you know it's not you, and you know it really is the Lord that does that,
I knew a pastor one time, I won't mention his name. He pastored in a pretty, I would say, rural town. It was a pretty country setting. And he got real fired up about the Reformation. And he called me up and he said, hey, man, I've got a great idea. I said, "Oh yeah, what's that?" And he said, "I want to paint the 5 solas in the sanctuary of the church." And he said, "I want them on the high on the wall. I want it to say sola fide, and I want it to say sola scriptura, and I want it to say solo deo gloria right over the baptistry." And he had this big thing, and he said, "What do you think about that?" And I said, "Who in that town speaks Latin?"
Yeah.
And he was like, "What?" And I said, "Dude, they barely speak English where you live. And you're going to write Latin phrases all over your building? How's that edifying to anybody other than you and a handful of dudes that know what that means?"
Yeah.
And he kind of was like, "Well, you make me feel like an idiot." And I wanted to say, "You are one." But in reality, preaching is taking in our instance, the New Testament, is taking a 2,000-year-old text and putting it in a 21st century context, or not context, but in a 21st century application. It's a living book. It's not merely a list of do's and don'ts.
Right.
It has application for every aspect of your life. Your employer, your employee, your husband, your wife, your children. You are the children. Whatever it is, wherever you are, it applies to you. And so what we should be able to do is take these New Testament writers, put it in today's understanding, just like the apostles took the Old Testament text and put it in the context of a New Testament setting. And I don't think you're altering Scripture to fit. I think the Word of God is true in every generation, but you're applying it differently.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, and just like you were saying a while ago, you're a backwoods Baptist. And by the way, that's the podcast you do.
It is.
You are the original backwoods Baptist, I guess, at least of our generation. And but the thing is well, you was telling me one time that Phil Johnson used a sermon or some of your sermons out of Grace Community Church where MacArthur's at to teach people. He's doing a preaching class basically, and he said, "Look, this guy's preaching the same things we are, but he's doing it in the language and in the culture that he's in."
Right. Yeah. He called it a hashtag Southern Fried Calvinism.
There you go.
And I thought that was a pretty good descriptor. I mean, I wouldn't beat the Calvinist bandwagon at all, but what he was saying was it's the same thing we're teaching on the West Coast. He's teaching it in the Ozarks of Arkansas.
Right.
But he's doing it in the language and understanding of the people.
Yep.
And I think that's what real preaching is. I think when Peter on the day of Pentecost said, "And you, with wicked hands, you did this."
Right.
He took this Old Testament prophecy and what occurred in the ministry and death, burial, and resurrection of Christ, and then laid that directly at the feet of the people that did it. And they would say, "Oh, no, the Romans did it." He said, "Oh, no, you did it."
Yeah.
And that's the same thing. Now, I wouldn't say that, our church did it, but I would say that what happened there was just as necessary in Van Buren, Arkansas, where I live, as it was in Jerusalem on the day of Pentecost, because
Absolutely.
what Christ did accomplished salvation for them and for us.
Right, exactly.
And so when you lay that out and you play that out, it's not like you have to tailor it to every little subgroup, but we in our own language do so. I'm not advocating like a cowboy church or a biker church or we got this little subgroup. We need to make this indent approachable, or we need no. We're basically doing it in an American setting. Right. And because I'm country, now look, I've preached in big cities, believe it or not. And they like it, maybe for the novelty of it, like, what will this babbler say kind of deal.
It's kind of like if somebody from Ireland comes over and preaches.
Yeah. And people always say, "I want you to come up here and preach, somewhere up north or in some big city. I want you to come here and preach." And I know why. It's because they're like, and people get saved under that kind of ministry. And, God uses a guy like that.
Yeah.
And, but in reality, we don't need to be intentionally trying to show people how smart we are as much as we intentionally need to be helping them understand what the pages of Scripture say and how they apply to us now.
Right. Right.
Yeah, that's preaching.
Yeah, that's true. And hey, I want to do something. I might want to change gears on us a little bit.
What's your show, Ron?
Well, all right, because we've been talking about me and you have thought about some of these things pretty similar, and we talked about doing a little talking about the G3 prior to this crash and burn thing that just happened with him.
Yeah.
But not just G3, but let's kind of talk about those types of things, and really we'll talk about just the idea of this idea that these guys are up here and everybody else is down here. Because I know you have a lot of thoughts on that.
I did a couple of years ago, Ron, on the Backwoods Baptist. I did a podcast on this exact thing, and man, I got roasted for it. Everybody was like, "Oh, you're just jealous. You just wish you were on that platform." And I'm like, no, I don't. I don't have any desire to be that well known. So we're going to run the risk if we say anything critical of, well, you're just jealous. That's sour grapes. You guys just wish you were up there. That's not the case at all. Instead, what I would like to convey is that there's a real problem here. I've known it for a while. You've known it for a while. You and I have talked about it. And we're not talking about an individual personality.
No.
We're talking about a culture where a segment of Christianity is idolizing a handful of men based upon their popularity.
Yes, and let me say this: as far as the content, like things that were taught and preached at the G3, conferences and such. Not that I listened to all of them. I did go to one of them, about 3 years ago or so in Atlanta. I mean, all the messages were good. I mean, they were, solid. I mean,
Yeah,
I would have agreed with them. It's not that at all. But what it was, it's like, and I've told you this, Vody Bakum come out because they would have a green room back there, where they have all the refreshments and all this. They wouldn't mingle with the commoners, and to be fair to them, it's probably pretty taxing because everybody's going to crowd around them, like a gorilla's having a baby or something, and you're just like.
I remember
like,
the first time I saw Paul Washer was probably 15 years ago in Tulsa. They had a small church or a family church ministry conference
brother,
or something.
We might have been at the same one.
They had Justin Peters. And,
he was their prime.
They were supposed
guy.
to have had Vody Bakum, but he had something better to do, and they sent somebody else.
We were at the same conference and didn't even know it.
You might have been over there in the crowd that was pressing into
Nope.
Paul Washer because I thought, well, this is a small church meeting. I might be able to visit with Paul Washer. It literally looked like Jesus of Nazareth was going into Jerusalem. The crowds were pressing in upon him so hard that somebody could have touched the hem of his garment and he never would have known it.
I'll tell you where I was at when that was going on. I was over there at the Heart Cry table talking to one of the Heart Cry guys. And I mean, that line of guys, I don't know how many of them there was. And I looked at the guy I worked with Heart Cry at the time. And I said, man, I'd hate to be him, talking about Paul Washer. And he goes, well, I'm about to have to grab him. We've got to catch a flight.
Yeah.
Now, I'll tell you something else. Before Paul Washer signed on to do that, there was only about 200 people registered.
That's right.
When Paul Washer signed on, it went up to 600.
Yep.
When Paul Washer left that day, there was about 200 people
left. That's right. That's true.
Yeah.
So I went to that, and I was disappointed. I mean, not in the preaching. Paul Washer preached. He was supposed to preach twice, and he had to fly out early, so he preached 2 sermons back to back. So he preached for 2.5 hours straight.
Like right before lunch.
Right before lunch, 2.5 hours straight, and then flew off. We came back, and it was like Justin Peters and some no-name guys, and so the next year I went to that meeting, and it was Phil Johnson and Scott Brown and somebody else.
Don Kern was preaching.
Don Kern was there. That's right. And so, anyways. That's where I had met Phil Johnson, but it wasn't in the throngs that were pressed in. He and I were sitting in the foyer at the same time. There was a guy preaching. I don't think either one of us cared for him. So we were sitting out in the foyer, and that's how we met and got to talking. And even though Phil and I were talking, I never looked at him and I never went pulled my phone out and went, I'm with Phil Johnson, or look where it was just like I'd met a pastor. We were visiting. And then when that was over, people saw Phil and they just came up there and pressed around him. And I was like, man, this is not healthy.
Yeah.
This is not a good thing.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh, secretary. You can shut our door if you want.
I'm sure we're too loud.
No, I just need to get this.
No, you're
All
good.
right.
You're good.
No problem.
You're just on a live podcast now.
Okay.
No, I'm just teasing.
It's good to see you.
Yeah.
Good to see you too, Harold.
All right. So,
See, this is why we did it like this. You know,
Yeah.
we just got whatever happens, you know.
So my point here is my view of other preachers has never been, look who I met, or look where I am, or can you believe we got to visit or talk? My view's always been the same. These guys are in the ministry just like me.
Exactly.
They may be more gifted than I. They may have a bigger platform than I. Well, they do have a bigger platform than I. But I don't desire their platform, and I don't desire their gifting. But that is a rare take in this day and age, because most of the young pastors and young preachers that we see in ministry today, that's what they're doing. They're like, man, I want to get me a speaking engagement. I want to travel around the country. I want to sit in the green room with whoever. And that's what I want to do. And Christ's teaching is exactly the opposite. He said, sit in the lowest chair, and if they invite you to the front, come to the front.
Yes.
But you start out in the bottom. These guys all want to press in and sit next to the dignitary. And then they get embarrassed when they're told, hey, young man, you go sit over there.
Yeah, humiliating there.
Yeah.
Well, you know, okay, just take what you just said. You said, I don't desire the platform. I know some people that know, like Paul Washer personally, you know, they're in the ministry with him and stuff, like it with Heart Cry. He really didn't ever desire that.
No.
But when that one sermon got posted, it just kind of started something.
Right.
And here's what I'd say, even you, like, you don't desire that. But here's the thing, if God desired to put you on a bigger platform,
Sure,
it's going to happen whether you want it or not.
Yeah.
But that's the key to it. These people need to understand they're not to be idolized. They've been given a larger platform just because God said this is where I want them.
Yeah.
And he can take that from them just as quick.
Prime example would be David Miller as well, that passed away this past year. David, in a wheelchair. And I remember the first time I heard David Miller preach, and he made this statement. He said, long before I was on the conference circuit, he said, I was driving a log truck to Snowball, Arkansas to preach to 5 widow women. That's where I got my start.
Yeah.
And he always remembered that. And when you're around David Miller, you don't get the idea that I'm David Miller and you're a peon, you know. And there are a lot of men that are well known, have big platforms, that are great guys, that have not let it go to their head. But sadly, as we've seen, there are men that are fallen because their success has gone to their head. They've become more important. Their ministries become more important than adherence to the Word of God. And I mean, we could list those guys off, but if you're keeping up with what's going on in G3, you know what happened. And let me just tell you, there's probably 3 or 4 other men in the G3 circuit that I've met personally and been around a time or two, that I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't fall in some other similar fashion. The reason being is they've got the same problem. They argue, they fuss, they fight, they lose their Christianity to defend their ministerial position. We don't have to defend ourselves. That's what it means to turn the other cheek. Doesn't mean that we're not fighters. If somebody slanders Harold Smith, okay, boy, you got me. You got old Harold Smith. Whoopee-doo. Look what you did.
Yeah.
These guys will spend weeks arguing on Twitter over silly things.
Oh, I know. That's, I know that you got off Facebook probably a year before I did. And mine, I had been wanting to and just couldn't pull the trigger. And then I got my account stolen. That's a long story. But I'm not on there anymore. But one of the reasons I wanted off of there was just what you was talking about. I got so sick of what you'd call the Christian community in a constant just debate, argue, stir things up for no other reason than just to have some debate going on. And I was just so tired of it.
I was in my truck one time with a very well-known pastor. We were driving down the road, and he was just over there on his phone like this. He was just, And I said, man, put your phone down. I said, we don't see each other but once every 2 or 3 years. He goes, I can't help it. So-and-so said such and such about Paul Washer, and I'm just not going to let that slide. And I said, Paul Washer's a grown man.
He's a
If
big
he
boy.
don't like what's said, he can defend himself.
Yeah. Yeah,
But-
I don't think he was posting anything or
No,
commenting.
but that's the culture we live in these celebrity circles.
Yeah.
They feel like it's their job to be vile and actually be mean and insulting and demeaning, and they're doing it in the good of defending someone else.
Yeah.
Or they're so insulated in their ministry that they forgot what it's like to be a small town pastor
Yes.
or a church deacon or a Sunday school teacher, and they think they're above reproach and really above criticism, and they end up like, Steve Lawson or some of these other well-known pastors that have fallen morally. And the solution to that is just to stay humble. It's not about me. It's all about Christ. If I lose my ministry, if people mock me online, it's not the end of the world. He gave me what little bit I have now. He'll give me what little bit I need tomorrow. And
Right.
if we can, that's easier said than done. But if a pastor can maintain that mindset, he can avoid rising and falling.
Yeah.
And I've seen a lot of pastors rise and I've seen them fall. And what I'm seeing are pastors that are rising, and they're rising for wrong reasons. They're rising through wrong motives. And I know what that leads to. I've seen it so many times. I'm like, don't go down that road. It falls off when you get to the top of it.
Right. I have a fear. I've always had a fear of like that idea of like trying to climb the ladder.
Yeah.
I don't want to be somewhere that God hasn't put me. If
Yeah,
God
right.
wants me there, then I'll let Him
Yeah.
put me there. And because I see what they do to guys that are in those big mainstream platforms, and I mean the microscopic comments and everything. Brother, they'd have a field day with me.
Sure.
I'd have to have somebody around me all the time just tell me not to say this or
And
that.
here's the thing that I've noticed, and I've known a few well-known preachers. Some I would admit to, and some I wouldn't admit to knowing. But I've known a few, and I'm still friends with them.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got their numbers in my phone. We're not buddies. I don't call them all the time, but if I needed something, I'd call them and they would answer. Some of these men have gone above and beyond for the cause of Christ. And I'll give you an example of a couple, okay? And I don't mind throwing their names out. Todd Friel, that operates Wretched Radio.
Yep.
About 15 years ago, I got an email from him. And it said, Harold, I had an online conversation with a lady that lives in your area who said she doesn't go to church anymore. She just watches us online. I messaged her and told her, this is not acceptable. You can't just stay home from church.
Right.
You need to be in a local church. And he gave her everything, and he said, I found your church online. I looked at your doctrinal statement. I verified you're probably their best bet. Best I can do in your area. And he said, here's her name. She's got 2 girls and a husband, and they're going to be at your church Sunday. And if they're not, I want you to call me and tell me they weren't here. And I'm like, this guy's running a nationwide ministry,
Right.
preaching all over the country, writing books, and he's taking time to send an email about an individual soul that's out of church.
Exactly. Yeah, just one person.
Just one person. So Monday, I messaged him back and I said, they came to church. They seemed to like it. I introduced myself. They say they're coming back. He messaged me back and said, I reached out to them already. They said they loved it. That family came to our church. The rest of my ministry there.
Oh, wow.
So for another 10 years, that family was in our church on a regular basis because a national guy. Most of these national guys, they don't have time for a woman with 2 kids that says she's not going to church. That's beneath them.
Right.
I'll give you another example. Because we're beating up some guys in the vague, I want to give you some definite examples. I had some pastor friends that went to Shepherd Conference. ShepCon, as the cool kids call it. They got out there, they opened the door to their Airbnb, and there were people in it. It was double booked, and the other people were there first. So they didn't have any place to stay. And during Shepherd's Conference, every place is booked.
I bet.
And so they said, do you know anybody at Grace to You that you could maybe reach out to that might be able to help us? Because Airbnb was trying to find stuff, but it was all like 3 hours away. So I sent a text message to Phil Johnson. And I said, dude, no, you're busy. You're putting on a conference. You got 3,000 or 5,000 preachers or however many they have. And I said, I got friends. Their Airbnb's double booked. They got there. The people already in the room. He messaged me 2 or 3 options that night, had people in the church looking around. I just thought he might point me to somebody that would handle that. It was him. And then Phil called me Saturday. I think it was a Saturday morning. It was the next morning. Maybe it was the first day of ShepCon. I don't know. I don't know what the dates were. But he called me and he said, Harold, did those friends of yours ever find a place? Because I've exhausted everything I've got. And the nearest I have is something 2 hours away. And I said, yeah, they got it. He doesn't owe me that. We're not,
Right.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
He's not doing that because Harold Smith needs a favor.
Right.
He's doing that because he loves pastors and he knows what that's like. And he knows that he's probably more in tune to find something than I am or they are. And his willingness to do that, follow up with that, be engaged in that.
Yes.
That's something that I could name off a dozen well-known preachers wouldn't have time to do.
Right, right.
Those guys value local pastors, local churches, and it doesn't matter what they get in return. This is Solomon saying, cast your bread on the water and it'll come back to you. You put stuff out there. This is Christ saying, invite those to a feast that could never invite you to their feast.
Yeah.
That
Exactly.
mindset is what we should never get over that, Ron.
Right.
We should never just be out inviting those that are dignitaries, that look good in festivals and that we could go to their festival. We should be willing to invite the unknown, the blind, the halt, the maimed, the poor. And when I see real pastors, when I mention Todd and I mention Phil, those are guys that I really have a lot of respect for just because of their love for small, insignificant people in the body of Christ.
Yeah. Exactly.
And I could go on with stories on those 2 men alone.
Right. Well,
But that's just a couple examples I wanted to give because I don't want you thinking that Ron and I, if you're well known or you've written a book, we're against you. Oh, no, that's not it. There's just an attitude of celebrity pastors that have gone to their heads, and there's an attitude of young preachers, some of them not so young, just grifting behind them, trying to hang on to their coattails and hope to get pulled up the ladder.
Right. I had a guy that, well, he's just a pastor I knew and had met, and we got to visiting, and he was talking about, I'm not going to give these names of these guys. Well, I'll say John MacArthur, but the other guy was a very well-known preacher. I mean, as far as preaching ability, a lot of people thought he was one of the very best, but he said, personally, the guy's a jerk.
Yeah.
You probably know who I'm talking about.
Well, I know several that fit that category.
Well, okay, you know who I'm talking about. But he said, but I'll tell you who is the most genuine, humblest, gentle, just kind guy if you ever meet him. And I said, who's that? And he goes, John MacArthur.
I can believe that.
Yeah, and he even told me, I saw this one time where there was a little girl that her family was visiting Grace Community. They didn't know anybody. They didn't know where to sit. She meets John MacArthur. And she's like, do you go to this church? And he says, yes, I do. And she goes, well, my name is this. He goes, well, I'm John. He just, but it's just a child, And it wasn't like this thing where he's roped off and he's,
Well, I know people that go to Grace Community Church, and they said John MacArthur visited them in the hospital. He would take his fair share of the hospital visits, go down there. Whereas a lot of times these guys that are running the seminary, writing books, writing commentaries, preaching, doing a pastor's school, they don't have time for that. That's relegated to the, family life pastor or something like that. When you never lose sight of how the church works, you don't fall into these scenarios. But a lot of these guys spend most of their week online, winning arguments, getting involved in this and that, and they lose sight of the local church. That is the bride of Christ.
Right.
That is what it's about. when they lose sight of that and it becomes about their ministry and this and that, they fall from that. And I've known some of these guys. I know them personally. I know some guys that haven't fallen. And I'm really surprised because I've been around them enough to know that they've got real issues.
Yeah.
And it's the grace and mercy
Yeah.
of God that He hasn't yanked the rug out from under them yet.
Yeah. When I came, well, I guess you could say when I started kind of coming to, and I'll just use the word Reformed doctrine. Now, I'm not the hardcore Reformed guy. I'm not that guy. But, doctrines of grace around people like that. We started going to a conference down at, they have it in Denton, Texas every year, and it's called the Fellowship Conference. And one good thing about it is, all of the speakers are right out there with you.
Yeah.
Even though I think a lot of people do come to meet these guys, it's still done more in a genuine way.
Mm-hmm.
They're just like, they'll be right across the aisle from you, and when there's a break, nobody's just cramming around them,
Yeah, right.
But the first year I went, one of the guys was a guy named Bob Jennings. And Bob, he kind of reminded you of like some Amish guy. He had this beard, kind of the Abe Lincoln beard.
I think I know who he is.
Suspenders. And even when he preached, he kind of had, even though he's from Missouri, he sounded like he was one of them guys from Pennsylvania or something.
Right.
Kind of had a funny accent, or at least I thought.
Yeah, right.
But I'm telling you what, I gave him a call, a couple, 2 or 3 times, before, and he passed away. Horrible situation of cancer. But at that time, I was just kind of searching. I just didn't know anybody. And every time I would call that guy, he answered the phone.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't care. I don't know if he was busy or in a hurry, but I tell you what, he put the brakes on everything.
Yeah.
And that guy would visit with you, and encourage, he was incredible. Don Kern has told me, he said that was my best friend,
Yeah.
And, he was just this genuine guy. And that's the thing of it is, like, like this podcast I started doing, it was for the guy that didn't have the formal education, the formal training.
Sure.
But one thing that I'd really like to put an emphasis on is focus on the people in front of you. Don't worry about what all the big guys are saying.
Yeah.
It's okay to glean things. It's we're all going to do that, but don't get out of focus. Don't get the cart in front of the horse or get flipped upside down. Keep things in perspective and man, focus on the people in front of you.
A lot of times I sign off my emails with your fellow laborer, Harold Smith. And I think that's good to remind ourselves, I'm laboring in the same field as fill in the blank celebrity pastor. I'm laboring, and that's all we are. We're servants of the master. Anytime we think we're more than that, anytime we think that the ministry we have requires us to deviate from Christian charity and humility and love in order to maintain, we've missed it. This is my big criticism of Southern Baptist. If there's 365 days in a year, there's 362 of them when Southern Baptists act like Southern Baptists. Then there's the 3-day Southern Baptist Convention where they act like total devils and they cuss each other, fight like the devil, rule each other out of order, slander one another, and then they hug and act like they're in real fellowship with one another and jump together in the cooperative program for another 362 days.
Yeah.
Dude, any honest looking outsider looks at the convention and goes, okay, you guys all claim to be in this together for the mission and to raise money for the cause of Christ, but you guys will slit each other's throat over who the next president's going to be.
Exactly.
Or who's on the executive committee or how they're going to handle this guy or that guy. And I'm like, communities can see that in churches as well.
Right. It's like watching a room full of Democrats and Republicans,
Bingo.
And the thing is, it's like each side comes with an agenda, and they're off balance. They're way out in left and right field,
Sure.
so far.
And then they'll all stand and say, God bless America, and sing it, and then they'll put their hats back on, and they'll go back to fisticuffs.
Yeah. It's just like when I met you, you invited me to the Preachers of Grace. When all that took place. Well, since then, I've met, several pastors that, and like I'll go out try to go out once a month. You do a pastor's lunch, and and I go out for that. And here's the thing: not we don't always agree on everything in there,
No.
but we don't major on those things. We talk now. We do cut up, and we have camaraderie, and we have a lot of fun. But we talk about serious things, and we'll throw things out there and such. And or if somebody will come and say, "Hey, has anybody ever dealt with this? I've got this kind of situation."
Yeah.
And sure enough, somebody in there has probably dealt with something
Right.
similar. Well, the thing of it is, it's just like you don't want to lose that focus of what we are, who we are, what we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
And it's just preaching God's word, preaching the gospel, loving the people in front of us.
Yeah, and I think that works as long as a guy can stay engrossed in his own church. He can stay so busy he doesn't have time to do everything else. The guys that I tend to find fault with in this area spend more time online than they do in their local congregation.
Right.
More time dissecting what's wrong with everybody else than sermon prep. More time doing all of these things. And there's a place for online criticism. There's a place to be able, you and I are doing a podcast. I do a podcast where I talk about issues that I disagree with. Everybody's entitled to their opinion, and we ought to be able to make it available. But you won't find me online arguing about my opinion. Sometimes people listen to what I say, and they say things on there, and I just totally disagree, and blah 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 blah, and I'll just say, well, bless your heart, and I'm not gonna engage because I've never seen one convert come from a Twitter war.
No, that doesn't happen that way.
It doesn't happen.
Now the thing of it is, in the past on Facebook, because I was the only social media platform I was on, but I would get into these debates. I remember when the theonomy thing got really big and popular. All that, and I really just didn't know what they were talking about. So I would genuinely just ask the question. So what do you guys exactly mean when you say you're talking about theonomy? And this is the way I'd get an answer. They go, "Oh, so you don't believe in it?" And I'm like, "What?"
Yeah.
I would even emphasize, like, "Hey, genuinely asking, not with an attitude." I'd even write that, because in person, I can definitely be like that, But, and I'd say, "Look, I said, look, I know this much. Theonomy just means God's law." I said, "I don't know of any Christian that would be mainly opposed to that, But what do y'all mean when you're talking about it, And it was just these smart alecks. And now what did it do to me? It got me all fired up, man. I was ready to throw down,
Yeah.
And but it would be like, I'd say, yeah, we ought to meet up. I said, you're going to find out you're probably a tough guy behind your keyboard. I'm the same guy here as I am there, But it's just like I got so tired of all of that stuff,
And but a lot of these guys, they don't know how to pastor a church in time of peace. So the first church I pastored there for a year. I'd been there a month. I had to ask a convicted pedophile not to come back to church. I didn't know anything about church discipline.
Right.
I just knew that you couldn't do what this guy did and stay in a church. And so I called my deacon and I said, we got to go confront this guy. He goes, I'm not going over there. He's the wealthiest man in church. So I called this guy that was a former pastor and I said, hey, I want you to go over there with me. We got to go confront this guy. He's soliciting teenage boys, and he's already been convicted once. And I want you to go with me. And he goes, I'm not going over there. His mother's a charter member. And
my God.
So I ended up calling this guy that was in church. He was a divorced guy, but I thought he was a good, honest guy. And he'd been a deacon, and his first marriage didn't work out. And he remarried. He and his wife kind of came out to the country, to get away from some of his past. And I said, would you go with me? And yeah. So we went and confronted this guy, and he confessed to us that he had a problem with teenage boys. And I said, well, you can't be part of this church in any way. Well, when word got out that I confronted the wealthiest guy in the church, whose mother was been there since day one, I learned how to be a fighting pastor because everybody there, I had a target on my back.
Right.
Half the people loved me. Half the people thought the church would never survive without this guy's money. I fought them for the next 11 months. And then I went to Lee Creek, a church that was 13 years old. I was their sixth pastor. there was a family there that pretty much everything went through them.
Yeah.
It wasn't so much a knockdown drag out as it was a Cold War, but
Yeah.
I was a fighting pastor. 2 years in, they tried to fire me. They lost. I won. They left. I had the keys to the palace, and I was in control. And I got miserable, Ronnie. All I knew how to do was I walked around with my gloves up and my chin down because I wasn't going to take one on the chin.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm ready to return fire.
Yeah.
I've got my finger in the safe position, but I'm on fire with a hammer back. That's all I'd known in ministry. So we had peace in the church. There was no turmoil. Business meetings were smooth. The family that ran things had left. Everyone else loved each other. So what I devolved into was fighting that out online. I would get on the internet every day, Ronnie, and I would defeat those that believed in baptismal regeneration. I would mock and ridicule those that were theonomists, and I would win all these online arguments, and people would quote me, and I would go home and say, honey, I got into it with these guys from New York, and they were advocating, and I destroyed them with Matthew 12 and John 4, and I had all these arguments, and they had no answers, and they left the chat room, and I won, and then I thought, man, all I've done all week long is argue with some doofus in his mom's basement, eating Cheetos, and I need to learn how to pastor a church in time of peace. A lot of these guys that we're talking about, these celebrity pastors, they don't know how to live at peace.
Now, you know what? I've never heard that term, but you know what? I would probably fit into that category. When in the Church of the Firstborn, there was always fights. I mean, and because we didn't have a set preacher to a meeting, like we could have one.
And you're like me. You're quick-witted. You can think of stuff. You can preach without notes. Man, in an argument, dude, I'm going to school you.
Yeah.
And you're the same way, Ronnie.
Yeah. And the problem was, there was always a war. I mean, and the way it was, like, if you was preaching and you said something this guy didn't like, you'd hear them pages start turning. You knew when you sat down, here come the rebuttal.
Yeah.
And it was going to be on. Well, and sometimes it was in your own church, but then it was us against the world because we thought we was the only church going. So there was always time fighting there. Well, Gary Fitzpatrick, he asked me, I was talking to him this morning, and he said, how are things going at Bowlegs? And I said, man, they're going good. And a few months ago, something kind of hit me. It's like when I came to Bowlegs, and I'll say this was a good church when I came here. I mean, they're good folks and all this. Now, has things changed? Yes, things have changed somewhat. But it's like the things that I said, hey, I'd like these things to change. Well, they've changed and we're there. And I found myself almost like, how do I pastor when things are going
when we don't
good?
have changes to make.
Yeah, when there's no changes to make and there's no wars going on. And I thought, man, I struggle probably more here than I do anywhere else. It's almost like you got to have something, some feelers to bounce off of.
Yeah.
And I thought, man, I'm not very good at this part. And sometimes it almost makes me feel like, well, I'm not doing anything.
Yeah.
Well, I'm still trying to lead through preaching and trying to reach out to people or whatever it is.
But it's ministerial PTSD.
Yeah.
You've been clearing buildings in a enemy city.
Yeah.
Every door you've kicked open, you've spun around in. There could have been a guy shooting back. There could have been a grenade roll in. And you've lived like that in a church. And now you're in a church where everybody loves their pastor. They want you to.
I sure hope.
No, I'm talking about it in the general sense, not you, Ronnie. You may never be lovable like that.
I know. I'm a hard guy to love.
But just think about, put yourself in military terms. It's hard to go from David killing 200 Philistines to purchase his first wife from Saul, to pay the dowry for her, to writing the Psalms, and be called the sweet psalmist of Israel. The only way a minister can be in these kind of battles and not get hardened and not just become a guy that has to just keep going back into conflict is to rely on the Lord, to be soft, to be humble, to be in restraint. And that's the thing about David. David was always under restraint. He knew when to kill Philistines. He knew when to slay the Amalekites. But he also knew when not to raise his sword up against Saul.
Yeah.
He also knew that that's the Lord's
Yeah,
anointed.
that's good. That'll preach, brother.
And so as ministers, we've got to know that there's a time that we draw our sword and we say, all right, come at me. Let's go right here. I'll die right here. You want to fire me? Y'all can call me out on my shield now. And then we need to know where someone takes a swing at us. And instead of just getting them in the ground and rolling them, we just laugh and go, "Do you think that was going to work?"
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that's the hard thing. And I was talking to a preacher one time, and he said, look, I've made a living out of criticizing the Southern Baptist Convention. It's all I've ever done. And he said, I write articles on it, do blog posts on it. All I've ever done is criticize Southern Baptists. He said, our church voted to pull out of the church, or pull out of the convention.
Now you don't know what to do.
He said, I don't know what to do with myself. I said, go home and love your wife with everything you got left in her.
Amen.
Pour what you got left over into them kids, and anything that's not spent in your home, I said, pour it into your church. And he said, I've never done that in my life.
Gosh, man.
But all he'd ever known, Ronnie, was fight.
Right. Well, it's just like you didn't, I mean, whoever the pastor you was, and he said, well, this guy said this about Paul Washer. You can make yourself believe these are the important things.
Yeah.
And you're just in these little ridiculous little wars that mean nothing.
Yeah.
And, I thought, I don't think anybody's ever been changed from a Facebook, battle.
Never had a convert.
Yeah. And it's just like, for me, I've had to get away from all of that stuff and just kind of get refocused.
Yeah.
And just go, it doesn't, listen, I love John MacArthur. I mean, a lot of people, I don't know why that guy gets hated on so much, but I like the guy.
I do too.
And you're the guy when that's the one name when everybody will say, I like John MacArthur, but I don't agree with everything. Nobody says that about anybody else,
Yeah.
It's like we want to stand alone, like, well, I don't follow him and everything, but it don't matter who it is. When I study the scriptures, I have to study them for myself. And I'll give you one right here. Over there in 1 Corinthians, where Paul is talking about people saying that there's no resurrection. There's that whole chapter, And he gets down there and he says, if there's no resurrection, he says, then why are you baptized for the dead? So I'm reading all these commentaries. And they're saying things like, the Corinthians were baptizing people, kind of like the Mormons would do or something.
I've heard
and I'm like, what are they but to me, it was just this simple. If there's no resurrection, then Jesus didn't rise from the dead. Why are you being baptized for a dead man?
That's exactly it.
That's what but here's the thing. All the big name commentaries are against me.
Yeah.
And I just have to stand up and say, listen, I don't care what they say. This is what I understand. This is what I'm going to teach.
Well, what the world needs is not somebody to regurgitate what someone else stuck down their throat.
Exactly.
We are lacking in original thought.
Yes.
Listen, preaching requires original thought. I'm not saying you take a new doctrine. I'm not saying you take a Bible verse and put it new. But what I am saying is most of what I hear is coming out of an echo chamber.
Exactly.
And for authority, we talked about this at lunch. I had a guy that was teaching double predestination. God predestines these to heaven. He predestines those to hell. There's no change in that. Well, if there's no change in that, why are we told to invite everyone to come unto me?
Exactly.
Why does Jesus say that?
Yeah.
Why does Jesus weep over a group of people that were predestined to hell? Instead, he says, I would have done this, but you would not. He didn't say God said you could not. And I was going over this with a guy, and I said, so tell me in the Bible where you get that. And this is what he said. He said, well, R.C. Sproul said that. And I said, well, for one thing, make that reason number 523 why I'm not Presbyterian. Number two, I don't care what anybody says. Take me to the 66 books. And when we deal with Reformed guys that have weird doctrines that they just think everybody should adhere to, I'll say, man, you guys have come a long way since Martin Luther. Martin Luther said famously, my mind is captivated to the scriptures. If you can't convince me from scripture, yet they will say the Westminster Confession says, or the canons of this, or the council of that. And I'm like, we don't look to men to settle the truth. We look to the word.
Yeah, I tell people, I said, when we talk about examine everything, they want you to examine it by
Yeah.
the Westminster or the 1689.
Yeah.
It's like, no, that's
Well, here's the thing. Let's just play along with them for a little bit, okay? They say Baptists come on the scene in the 1620s to 1640s in London. That's what the Reformed Baptists will say. Okay, I'll play along. So you're saying in the first 40 years, by 1689, they had a complete and accurate form of doctrine? They haven't learned anything other than in the first 40 years. These guys came out, according to them, they came out of the Catholic Church. They had no commentaries that were solid. They just had a Bible. In 40 years, they finalized everything we need to know about the Baptist faith, and it's been perfect ever since. I would say you're giving the 1689 inspiration that you're not giving to the scriptures.
exactly. That's just it. It's just like when it comes to 1689. I just tell people, I said, I don't sign off on everything here.
Exactly.
There's certain things I don't agree
Exactly.
with. And boy, when you say that, my goodness, you talking about original thought. I've used this term for years. I just tell people, I said, don't hat check your brain at the door. Don't let other people do the thinking for you, whether they're dead theologians or the guys today. And here's the thing. I count myself in the backwoods Baptist camp.
We'll take you, Ron.
Yep. And I'm not, I don't have a formal education. I don't have formal training. And sometimes this is what it feels like. It feels like like an old dog that somebody used for a coon dog, but he really wasn't a coon dog. And they just pat you on the head and say, man, he ain't a real coon dog, but he sure done pretty good, for what he is. But the thing it is like people forget God used people that were backwoods. He used fishermen. He used guys that were the nobodies. They weren't the elite educational
Acts
guys.
5. They took knowledge that these men had been with Christ.
Yeah.
They were looking at these apostles. They were given answers. They were like, how in the world did they put up? Where did that come from? How did they figure that out? And somebody's like, they've been with Jesus.
They've been with Jesus.
And they were like, oh, okay. Well, here's what we're lacking. We've got guys that have been with Hodge. We've got guys that have been with Bevnick. We've got guys that have been with fill in the blank. Give me a commentary.
Matthew Henry.
Yeah. They've been in the pulpit commentary.
Gill, Barnes.
They've been in Gill and Barnes. But have they been with Christ? And the answer is no. They've been online arguing with infidels and pagans, and they haven't been with Christ. They haven't prayed. They're not reading their Bible, or if they're doing it, they're doing it in a systematic way to say, check off the box there, I did it.
Right. Yeah.
Not in a way where they say, God, what do you want your people to hear? When you formalize preaching to the point that it's just this book, this verse, systematically going through Scripture, you've left the Holy Spirit out.
Right.
Now look, I preach verse by verse through books of the Bible.
Yep,
But buddy, let me tell you, when I'm coming to the end of a book, I am begging God to put me in the one we need to be in. Yep. It's not just a matter of throwing a dart at 66 books on the wall.
Right.
And whatever it is, it's God's word, it all preaches. And then when I'm preaching those verses, I'm not just getting up, giving them a running commentary of what Dr. So-and-so said. I'm begging God again to give me an understanding and a fresh application to meet the people I'm preaching to.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, even that right there, the fresh application. I say a fresh word, and I mean in the real sense of the word, not like something extra biblical. But like when I went to Brian Stover's church to preach, he told me we're a small group, and pretty young, like mature, scripturally, I guess you could say. Nothing ever changes in me. If I was preaching there, I'm going to preach the same way that I would preach if I was preaching at a conference of 1,000.
Yeah.
Nothing's going to change. I don't care if there's 10 people or 10,000. I'm gonna be the same guy every time.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you something. What you see, he's talking about, spending time with Gil or Henry. Even in today, it's like when somebody does a great work, God raises somebody up, brings them out. It's like people want to carry on that guy's work. It doesn't work that way.
No.
it's like that word. I'm reading a book right now called The Law of the Passover by a guy named Conrad Murrell. I think that's the book I'm reading. I mean, I'm reading it, but I think it's in that book. He talks about George Whitefield, and he says something like, the people of Whitfield's day wanted, they said, why don't you start a denomination like the Wesleys did? And he says, let the name of Whitfield disappear.
Mm-hmm.
Let it vanish,
Yeah.
He says, I don't care if people remember me or not, as long as they remember Christ. Look, it goes back to the same thing. There's only one Harold Smith.
That's right.
And no matter how much we love Harold Smith and, all those things, you're here for this time. It's just like the Bible says in Acts, I think 13 or so. David served the purpose of his generation, or however it words that.
Yeah.
But basically, he did what he did for God in his time. You have this time, I have this time, and after that, there's going to be other people come along, and it's not about trying to carry on somebody else's work. It wasn't their work to begin with. It was the Lord's.
I've heard people say it this way, and I think it's accurate. You be concerned about the depth of your ministry.
Yep, and God will.
Yeah, your closeness to God, your depth in the Word, your deepness with your fellowship with Him. Let God be concerned with the width of your ministry.
Right.
And I think when you see people that have successfully served the Lord, even on the big stage, that's what they had. Whether it's George Mueller, Adoniram Judson, you mentioned George Whitefield, Charles Spurgeon, these men that lived in this manner, they stayed committed to the Lord. They focused on Him. They weren't concerned about being popular. I mean, Spurgeon in the downgrade controversy, he said, I will stand alone.
Yeah.
Mueller cared for 10,000 orphans in his day, gave thousands of dollars in 1800 currency to missions, and never asked anybody for a penny or told anybody what his plans were.
Right.
He just told the Lord. Hudson Taylor was the same way. Never asked for a penny, just asked God. Sustained him all through the China Inland Mission, all through his life. When I look back to what we originally, started talking about in here, this conference culture, this celebrity culture, these guys are the exact opposite. They're constantly appealing for money, selling products, selling merch, raising money. I mean, go back to G3. They're selling VIP passes until somebody called them out. For $1,000, you can shake hands with them and set an exclusive seating.
That was disgusting.
Yeah. But look, when the most important thing is the ministry that you've built, you got to fund it. Can you imagine Charles Spurgeon selling people tickets to shake his and Mueller's hand in London? Can you imagine Moody doing that? Can you imagine under the Moody tent, Ira Sankey's up here singing, and Moody comes out and preaches, and then he says at the end, hey, if you happen to have $10, I'll be signing Bibles over here in the corner to raise money for what we do.
Yeah.
How in the world did Moody go around the world? How did all this happen? Because God was in it. These guys, what they're doing, whether it's G3 or any of these other large groups, when they take their focus off God and they spend all their time bickering and arguing or fooling around on their wives or living some immoral lifestyle or chasing money, fill in the blank.
Yeah.
And we could fill in the names of people that are all doing that in the last 2 or 3 years. All of them have ceased to understand why they're here and what the role is.
Right.
Every single one of them. And that's what happens every time.
Well, one of the things, like not all, and I'll say something about that. Most of those guys that preach like at the G3 or T4G or Gospel Coalition, whatever it was, they're given a pretty hefty sum just to come.
Yeah.
Most of them require a certain fee.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if they give their buddies a break. I don't know. But I'm not going to say who it is because I don't know this. Like, I don't have the factual evidence, but I have been told that if this one well-known preacher comes, it's going to cost X amount of thousands of dollars. He has to have first-class flight seats for him and his entourage, like he'll bring 3 or 4 people. They have to be like in a 5-star hotel or the best that you got. They have to have a driver taking them around. I mean, just pampered to the core.
Yeah.
And then they have the gall to come up and preach about how you should trust in the Lord as you go out, and I'm just like, now the message is right, but it's just like, you are preaching to yourself too.
Mm-hmm.
Harold, when I left the Church of the Firstborn, I think we might have talked about this on your podcast the other day. I'm not positive. I lose track, but I went down there to Arkansas. Yeah, I think I did talk. I'll just say it again real quick. But when I went out to Arkansas and I preached this revival, and it was a revival I kind of stumbled into. I was supposed to just be there through the weekend, and it just ended up going like through the next Thursday or Friday. And as I left there, the people had taken up a love offering, and it was they really poured it on. I mean, and it was so foreign to me. I didn't know what really to do about all this because I wasn't used to preaching and ever getting a dime. Well, when I left, I remember thinking, I'd been hearing about these guys charging fees to go preach.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought, Lord, I would never do that.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm thinking, he says, freely we, receive, we're going to give. Oh, just so Brandon White knows we're doing a podcast right when he calls.
Oh, this is an important preacher, Ron. I have to take this.
That's big time there. Yeah. Yeah, you text him and say, hey, man, doing a podcast. We're talking about you right now. But, the thing of it is I could not ever tell somebody, hey, if I'm going to come, it's going to cost you $500 or $1,000.
Yeah.
I don't even understand that whole way of
I've
thinking.
had people asking, ask me to come preach, and they say, so what do you charge to do something like that? And I say, nothing. And they were like, nothing? That's another important preacher.
Man, something's going on, brother.
I hope the rapture didn't happen and it's just us and these two
Here I'm
left.
talking about these celebrity preachers, and I'm sitting by one.
So what was we talking about? I had a real good point I was going to make.
Oh my goodness, we was talking about not being paid.
Not being paid. So they say, what do you charge to do this? And I say, nothing. And they'll say, no, we got to give you something. I say, okay, whatever you want to do is fine. Well, what would be the standard you would take? I said, look, man, I don't want your money.
Yeah.
The Lord takes good care of me. If you want to give me something, I will take it. But I don't set a fee for this.
No.
If you guys want to take up an offering, that's fine. Because that's how I live. I live on offerings that are given to my ministry after they support their local church.
Yeah.
If somebody has something above and beyond what they give to their church and they want to share it with the ministry I have, I accept that. But I don't set a fee for that. And so I've driven 16 hours, preached for $150, supply preaching fee, and drove back and stayed the night in a motel.
Yeah.
But then I've also gone and preached one time and they give me $2,500.
Yeah.
And I trust the Lord to know when I need this and when I need that, and I don't worry about it.
Yeah.
And I haven't missed a meal yet. If you're looking at this in video, you can tell I'm well fed. But the point is, I pray and ask God to fund the work that I do. He give me the ministry. I trust him to fund that. I have to live by that.
Yeah.
We have a free Christian bookstore. We have a building rented where, we feed pastors there once a month, and we have some other ministry that goes on there. We can record podcasts and whatnot. But people come in and we tell them all of our books are free. And these are about, we got about 70% new, about 30% used books. So people will take up a book and they'll look at it and it might say $25 on the back of it. Big, fancy, hardback book. And they're like, look, I got to pay for this. And I'm like, no, we don't take any money. We don't take any money. And people will want to start giving us 20s. And I'm like, look, if you're the person I'm trying to help, if you're giving money to me, you're defeating my purpose.
Yeah.
I don't want to help. I don't want to take money from the people I'm giving books to.
Right.
Now, if that person goes home, gets on our website, sees an online donation, and they give me $50, let's say, that's okay. What they did was they went and looked at the ministry we were doing. They said, hey, this is something I want to be a part of. That's not me out there giving stuff away, hoping I get something back.
Right.
Every Saturday, we turn down anywhere, sometimes $50, sometimes $150 in donations. That's just people getting 20s out or getting 10s out, and I'm like, no, we don't take money here. No, we don't want any money. It's free. The reason, I mean, could we take in enough money? Would that help? Yeah, sure, it would help. But what we're trying to demonstrate is that we're trusting the Lord to fund the ministry that we have.
Right.
We're not wanting the people we're trying to help to fund the ministry we have. This is Paul working with Priscilla and Aquila making tents because the church ain't ready to fund him. But he's receiving support from other churches.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that's our ministry thinking in that. And these guys that are charging set fees have all these requirements of first class travel, this and that. I've stayed in people's homes. I've stayed in bad motels. I've stayed in nice motels. I've stayed in basements, slept on bunk beds, and I've had the whole, vacation home to myself. The point is, I don't think I will ever get to, I hope I don't ever get to a point, and if you see that I am, Ronnie, you call me out on your podcast. I don't want to get to the point that I have some kind of minimum criteria. Somebody has to mean, I only stay at certain motels.
Right.
And look, let me give you some advice. Put your preacher up in the best motel you can. Give him enough money to cover his travel expenses out there and back, and if you want to give him some more, great. But stay away from preachers that have a set fee of what they have to do. They're not trusting in the Lord. They're trusting in their ministry strategy to make ends meet.
Right. Yeah, exactly. No, I agree with that 100%. I mean, bless the guy that's coming to bless you,
Yeah. And another thing, I don't go to conferences I have to pay for. That's just my takeaway. And I've been to some good conferences that I did pay for.
Oh, yeah, me too.
But I've changed my position. If you're charging money to get into the conference, I'm not going.
Yeah.
Now, if you want to pass the plate, I promise I'll come prepared to give. But if you say, hey, look, it's just $99 and you're going to get $100 worth of books back, I give away books all day. I don't want $100 worth of books.
Yeah.
Pass the plate. I might put $100 in it.
Right.
But I mean, I'm not going there. I'm not paying to come hear people preach.
Yeah.
But I will give towards conferences where people preach.
Right, exactly.
And if you're not willing to live by the policy that I'm living by, I'm just not interested in your meeting.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just like we do our conference. We do one at the last weekend of July since I've been here. So I guess this will be the 5th one maybe. And you've preached at 2 of them?
2 or 3, yeah.
And yeah, I mean, we do that and we don't charge anybody. I mean, we try to, and on Saturday, we try to feed everybody a meal.
Yep.
I mean, usually just runs Friday night and then Saturday, and then we have a meal and then one speaker after that. And people shouldn't have to come and pay. I mean, they're already driving and such. And
if the Lord wants it done, He'll fund it.
Exactly.
And if you want to take up an offering, that's fine too.
Yeah.
People want to give, that's fine. At Preachers of Grace, we put that on for 11 years. The last couple of years we had 50 to 60 preachers a year. We paid for everybody's motel room, everybody's meals. We paid every preacher that preached, and we gave everybody a stack with about 10 new books in it.
Yep, I've been the recipient of them.
That's 500 or 600 books that we purchased and gave away. That's I don't know how many meals, 3, 4 meals, I guess 4. We did that for 2 nights and 3 days. So just figure we fed 5 meals to 50 or 60 pastors, their wives, and then people in our church, probably 125 people. We fed them, and all we had in the back was a box that if you wanted to put money in, you could put money in. We never passed a plate. We never told anybody to give. And look, we gave away gas cards. A lot of years, if people were struggling, we knew maybe they were in a small church and maybe they was taking off work to come.
Yeah.
And they were making a financial sacrifice to get here. We gave them gas cards to cover their gas going and coming. And look, we never missed a thing. We never lacked anything. The church never lacked anything. We had more than we knew what to do with. And we were a small church.
Yeah.
We first did that. We had about 25 people. The last year we did that, we probably ran 80. And I say that to say we poured a ton of money in pastors and helping other churches. And
how many do you usually have on average? About 50, 60?
The first year we did it, we had 25, and it got bigger every year. And COVID hit during there. I think during the COVID year, we were like 45. But I would say the last half of that, we ran close to 50 or 60. I think we had 60 the last couple years.
What was the last year you did it?
2023, I guess.
Okay, so see,
So we did it from
I came in,
2012 to 2023.
right. I think I came in 21, 22, and 23.
That's probably right.
Yeah.
But the thing about it is the last 2 years that we did it, I paid for it out of the ministry account that I have.
Oh wow.
So there wasn't an expense on the church because I wasn't the pastor there anymore.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
And so I say that not as a brag on me, but I believed in it. I asked the Lord to fund it, and I had the money to do it, and I didn't have to go around asking people to give money. I just had enough money in my ministry account to take care of my personal needs and to pay for the meeting. And if you look at what I receive as a missionary on a monthly basis, this is not enough for me to live on. But through preaching, through interim pastorates, through one-time gifts of various people the Lord causes people to give, I get chunks of money from unknown places, people I don't even know. Somebody told somebody that told somebody, and they said, hey, Lord bless me, I want to send this money to them. That money was always there every year to put that conference on in my ministry. And in the church, it was the same way. We budgeted like maybe $5,000 for the conference. It would cost around $15,000 to $17,000.
Good day.
Well, I mean, just figure you got to buy 70 motel rooms, and we didn't put y'all up in Motel 6.
That was 2 nights.
2 nights.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it would be like 35 motel rooms a night. But you figure just the motel rooms was a big expense. Meals, I try to do a lot of cooking myself.
Right.
People did a lot of, I tried not to burden the people in cooking. They served books. We had ministries that donated books. They knew we were giving them away. Free Grace Press, Jeffrey Johnson down at Grace Bible Church in Conway. He would always fix me up with some books. I'd go down and try to buy them.
Yeah.
We'd have to argue for him to take money. He'd want to just give them away, and I'd want to pay for them. But we never went around seeking donations. You know,
Right.
We never said. One year, Grace to You gave us Charismatic Chaos and John MacArthur's book, or not Charismatic Chaos, Strange Fire.
Yeah.
We had the big Strange Fire book, and but I never called Grace to You and said, hey, I'm doing a preacher's conference, and we're giving away books, and this is a ministry, and I just prayed and said, Lord, you know we need books to give these preachers, and this is how much money I got, and I'd like to get as many books as I can, new books for them.
Yeah.
And man, just people would contact me, and if you trust the Lord to do these things, He will provide above and beyond, you could ever imagine. I'm talking about shaken down, pressed together,
Right.
overflowing. But most of these guys run their ministry like a business and not like a ministry.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I think that's the problem when you see guys trying to keep their ministry together, using clever techniques to raise money, selling merch, selling booth rentals, all that kind of stuff. If they was a ministry, they would just say, look, we've prayed about it. These pastors have agreed to come at their own expense. They would, and we're going to preach. And we've rented this building, and there'll be a box in the back, and you guys can put money in it to cover the rental of this place.
Right.
And if they did that, I think God would show up and honor it, and they wouldn't feel so led to go do all these crazy things to keep it together.
Yeah, exactly. One of my favorite books that I've read in the last few years, I got at your conference, but it was on the table of just old books that was just being. It was,
Yeah, we also had a give and take book table where you could put books out of your own library for donation, or people could take them.
I don't know if it came from yours or somebody else, but it was Vance Havner on Joy. I think that's what
that
it was.
was one of mine.
Yeah, it's a little hardback book, man, and I think I've read that thing twice, and
I have too.
Yeah, good
Well,
book.
I came and preached for you later that year, and you were giving away modern copies of it because my copy was falling apart.
That's right.
And I've tried to order that book since, and it's only available on e-form. I can't get it in print. If I could, I'd have it at the bookstore. The thing about that Joy, I think it's called Finding Joy or something. It may just say Joy on the front.
Something like Christian Joy.
Christian Joy, that's it,
Yeah.
by Vance Havner. That thing was written in 1934.
I know.
And you'd swear up down it was written in 2024.
Exactly. It was very relevant for the day.
We're talking about during the Depression,
Yeah.
before World War II, that book was written.
Yeah, and it's describing the culture today.
And the guy lived to 1989.
Yeah.
So 50 years before he died, he wrote that book as a younger man.
Yeah.
And you read it today, you'd just be like, this dude just finished reading the newspaper, you know?
Oh, yeah. Exactly.
I mean, it was that pertinent.
Yeah.
But there again, Vance Havner's a guy. Who else is like Vance Havner?
Nobody.
He's his own unique, original thinking voice.
Yeah, and that's one thing that guys need. And now here's what I want to say: don't try to be your own self so you can get that platform. Just simply be yourself.
Be yourself. If that never happens,
And you know, and like we was talking earlier, you've got to have you've got to be able to think for yourself. If you look at all the men that really stood out in the history of the church and everything, that's what it was. It was guys who weren't afraid to say what they believed.
yeah,
They weren't afraid to step out and do things that maybe others were. You know, I've been watching this. I just started it the other day, but I've watched 2 or 3 of the episodes of Winston Churchill.
I've watched some of his stuff here recently.
Yeah, well, this is a new one on Netflix. I guess it's new. I'm not positive. But it's like a, I don't know, 6-part series or something. But what an interesting individual. I mean,
For the time he was in,
oh
dude,
man,
anybody other than him in England would be speaking German today.
oh yeah. I mean that dude was the man, you know.
When he
and,
gives that speech, we will fight in the bushes, we will fight in the fields, we will fight in the beaches, we will never give up.
yeah,
And I mean, I just wanted to go enlist in the army when he got
No
done.
kidding.
You know, I was like,
that dude
Yeah.
was fire. And you know what? Here's another thing. He would go down and talk to the common people.
yeah.
He would go out
He'd
and
be
talk to
walking
the soldiers.
around, bombed out Britain. And like, I hate to see that, you know, give money out of his pocket to people that
Yeah.
needed it. And dude,
Yeah, he was a man, you know, but it's the guys like that aren't looking around to see what everybody else is doing.
yeah.
No, it's just like this is what needs to be done.
Yeah.
And
And I've said this, when we look at like war and we see these great generals there, I'll give you some Civil War heroes of mine. Lee was a great Civil War hero of mine. Godly man, prayed regularly, studied his Bible, lived with impeccable character. Stonewall Jackson, impeccable man. Jeb Stuart, J.E.B. Stuart, cavalry general in the war. These guys they're all legendary status now. Jackson died in battle, shot by his own men. Jeb Stuart was shot in the back on a cavalry charge,
wow.
and died the next day. People like A.P. Hill. There are at least 20 men just as valiant, just as brave, just as gifted that died on the battlefield. We don't even know who they are for every one of those.
right. Yeah.
Every one of them walked out onto the battlefield, drew their saber, said, "Come on, men, there's the enemy," and went toward them and took a bullet in the face or the chest
Right.
and bled and died, and nobody wrote a book about them.
Exactly.
And the only difference is God chose to elevate these men, record their stories, make them famous, and cause them to be carried on today. You may never, listen to me now, you may never ever be famous, but you still have the responsibility to pull out your saber, raise it up, and say, "Come on, men, there's the enemy," and march
Yeah.
toward them in bravery and doing what God's called you to do. And if you take a bullet in the face and you burn out in 5 years and you go to glory and the world doesn't know it, it's recorded in heaven.
Well, and I'm going to say this too. The men who lead like Churchill, now see, we're looking back.
Yeah.
We're going, what a man. But at that time, he was feared. He was hated. It showed these deals where he's up trying to give these warnings about Hitler, and everybody's going, boo,
Yeah,
sit down
shouting
and
him
shut
down.
up. Yeah. And he'd sit down. He's just frustrated. The thing of it is, in your time, you may not be popular.
No.
But the guys who tried to compromise, the guys who tried to appease the enemy, they're only remembered in bad light.
Yeah.
You know, so you always need to remember that, and it's like doing the right thing. I mean, just having courage. It's doing the right thing in the
Yeah.
face of all the doubt and the fear,
Yeah.
and being the man.
I was studying Revolutionary War for some time. I was the American Revolution. I was a big student of that for probably 5 years. I watched about every documentary I could find, every YouTube reenactment. I even listened to several podcasts that would cover the Revolutionary War and secession. I watched just everything I could find for years on it. And what I discovered was there were some very valiant men that were instrumental. We would not be a free country today, free of British rule, if it weren't for these men. Really, nobody knows anything about them.
Exactly. Yeah.
Paul
exactly.
Revere was not a famous character in Paul Revere's day.
No.
He was made famous later by a poem from one of his distant relatives that made him the cult hero that he is
Right.
today.
Right.
And so I say that to say you're not. There's no guarantee of fame or popularity. But there is the command that this is what we do, this is how we fight, this is where it's fought at. You just go do that. If you get elevated to general and they decide to put you on a horse and they decide to stamp your face on money,
Right.
can remember that you started out just leading a small group of men into battle.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, you look in church history, the time of Whitefield and Wesley and all those guys, and you've probably heard his name, but he's a lot lesser known, but a guy named Hal Harris.
Yeah.
Okay, so Hal Harris didn't have quite the popularity of those guys, but this guy was a fireball.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a story where somebody pointed the old musket at him. I mean, the pistol, and it wouldn't shoot. And he says, "Point it that way, and it'll fire." And the guy pointed over there,
And it went off.
And it went off.
Yeah.
And I remember reading about Whitefield. Now you'd think Whitefield, man, this guy'd be. He said he was afraid. He was kind of fixing to cower it out, you know.
Yeah.
And he thought, well, what would Hal Harris do? You know, the WWE.
Yeah.
And he turns around and goes back and preaches, you know. But sometimes even the guys that are known, the guys that are lesser known to you and I, they were instrumental in these guys' lives.
That's right.
And so you may be a guy that you may not be the name, you're the big time player, if you want to say it, but you may be the instrumental guy and that encourages the guy that God has put on the platform. Yeah. And so it's just understanding that the work is the Lord's. Just do what God's put in front of you. And if you think you want fame, you're probably crazy, because with it comes an increase of all the negative stuff.
Yeah.
And the truth is, if these guys were honest, even the favorable publicity. Mm-hmm. I mean, like, I don't know how you are, but I know with me, when people come up and say, "Oh man, Ronnie's a real man of God," or they're saying all these flattery things, and I'm thinking, actually, you don't know Ron like I do.
Yeah.
This dude, you know, he's not always that good of a guy, you know. I mean, not that I'm trying to be bad, but I mean, I know the battles that go on, you know. Mm-hmm. And it's like that flattery sometimes is kind of embarrassing, because it's like, that's not exactly always true.
Yeah, right.
And so
I don't know. I mean, the thing about it is you know, you mentioned David served his generation and died, slept with his fathers.
Yeah.
I think about Esther, you know, and Mordecai telling her, for a time such as this, you've been put in this position. I think we all have to figure out where we're at, what our calling is. If it's pastoring a church, pastor it. If you're an evangelist, burn the roads up, stay preaching, don't worry about the money or the fame. If you're a missionary, you know, they may not write books about you when you're gone, but you need to know there's a scribe in heaven. And everything that you've done in service for him is going to be recorded. And everything that you do in service to him is going to go through the fire.
Right.
And all the big conferences you preached in are probably going to burn up. They're probably not going to amount to anything. All the arguments that you had on Twitter or Facebook, or all the Substacks you wrote about this guy or that guy, are probably going to go up in flames. And the gold, silver, and precious stones were probably none of that.
Right.
And you need to just go in there saying, all right, this is what he gave me to do. This is what I did, and I'll let God be the one that rewards me. and I won't seek any fame in this life. I had a guy tell me one time. He said, "I want to make you a household name. I want everybody in America to know who you are." And I said, "I don't want that." I said, "That would terrify me. I don't want people to know who I am. I don't want that many eyeballs looking at Harold Smith, because I know what I'm capable of."
Yeah,
And I don't want
exactly.
that. I don't want people to know who I am. I just want to pastor this little church.
Yeah.
And I just want to be faithful here. I want the people in this community to know. I always think about that. I always think about King Saul when he was just kid Saul, and he was looking for his father's mules or donkeys, and he had a servant with him, and the servant said, "Let's turn in here. There's a man of God in this city." And I heard an old fundamentalist preacher, I can't remember his name all of a sudden, but he had a sermon. It said, "Is there a man of God in this city? In your city? Is there a man of God in your city?" And what is a man of God? And he was preaching on Samuel. Samuel was the man of God. And that preacher's name was Tom Malone. And man, he preached that sermon, and he was dead before I ever even knew who he was. But I had listened to some old recordings, and I thought, man, I want there to be a man of God in Van Buren. You know,
Yeah.
and I want people to know, hey, there's a church in Van Buren. They're real. There's a pastor over there. He knows what he's talking about.
Yeah.
I may not be known in Oklahoma City, but I want to be known in Van Buren. I mean, I'll be known in Little Rock, but I want to be known where the church I pastor is.
Yeah.
And I don't seek any fame beyond. I want to be known here. And I've had people say, I would ask them at church, I would say, "How'd you find out about our church?" You know, we're kind of on the edge of town where I used to pastor.
Yeah.
And I'd say, how did you find out about our church? And I heard this more than once. They said, "Well, I was going to church such and such or wherever," they say. And I said, "I really just want a church where they preach the Bible." And they say, "Oh, you want to go over there?" And they take it serious. And then this one lady said, this is what they told me. They said, "Y'all take the Bible so serious that if you don't straighten up and you live in sin, they'll kick you out of their church." And I said, "Yeah, that's true." But that's the reputation I wanted.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll tell you funny, when these people didn't stay, but they came and visited our church, and they were, disgruntled about something. And I said, well, what brought you here? Did you know somebody? And they said, "No." They said, "We went to church with a lady, and she said, 'Hey, if you want to go somewhere,' she said, 'you need to go over to Bowlegs.'" She goes, that guy's serious, And I'd met her one time, and what it was National Day of Prayer, and her friend knows my wife a little bit, and she calls my wife. She says, "Hey, we were supposed to have a pastor pray for a certain thing, and he can't make it. Would your husband do it?"
Ron in a pinch, yeah.
So it's like, yeah, okay. So we go down there. Well, my prayer was for the pastors, okay? And it just worked out that I went last. Well, I started praying, and I was like, "Lord, we need real men of God in the church. We need them behind the pulpit. And if these guys that are preaching ain't going to do it, get them out of there, I'm praying something like that." And she says, "When I heard that guy pray," he says, "you need to go check that one."
But I mean, you want people to know that. But look, I don't want to be known on the internet as
No.
Harold is this or that. He's talking about that right there. I'm reading a book that you're probably going to need to read before too long. It's The Saint in the Wilderness. It's the book about Robert Sayers Sheffey.
Oh, yeah.
It's the original book written by Jess Carr.
Really?
Russell, my pastor, got it for me.
I've got to get that.
So Russell got it for me for Christmas, and I'm almost through with it. I probably
They didn't even write you've held off on this information for this
Well, I started out reading it, and I'm like, okay, that's all right. I don't really. And then all of a sudden, I got into it, and then, man, now I'm in it bad. But I say all that to say, if you've never seen the movie Sheffey, you probably ought to go watch it.
Yep.
It's free on YouTube. It's free on Netflix. It's probably free on Tubi or some other. You can find it. It's called Sheffey. It's about a Methodist circuit riding preacher. But in that book, he was known for praying for people in public by name. So he would preach, and if nobody came down to the aisle, he would say, "Well, I guess our sweet Lord hasn't saw fit to save any souls here tonight. Let me dismiss us in a word of prayer." This is what he would say, Ron. He'd bow and he'd say on the back row is Brother Ron. And every person in this room knows he's running a moonshine still except his wife. Lord, I'd pray that you'd break the news gently to his dear wife, and you'd convict him that running a still is not only sinful, but the secrets he's keeping from his sweet wife. And he would just go down the list, and there's Janet in a real nice dress with a new bonnet, and the father of her children is sitting on the other side of the church with a new hat, acting like they don't even exist. We know who the father of these children are. And I mean, he would say this in the prayer. And they said sometimes he'd pray 30 minutes and he'd call out everybody in the room.
Oh my goodness.
And he'd say, now bless us, Lord, for this day and see us safely back this way again. And he'd
Oh my goodness.
Yes.
Yeah, I got to read that one, man. Yeah,
There was a group of guys that waited on him. They got around. They were running moonshine and gambling and whatnot. Not moonshine. Well, I mean, it was whiskey. You could do this back then. Anyways, they were running stills, and he was praying against their stills. And I mean, he prayed, and several of their stills got destroyed by freaks of nature.
Yeah, one of those happened in that movie.
Yeah,
You showed that.
yeah. And so that really happened. And so these men got together, and they yanked him off his horse, and they went to beating him, and they was about to kill him. And this guy run up there, and they said, look, we don't care that you preach against drinking and gambling, but quit calling us out by name. Well, the sheriff got word of it, and they arrested all those men and put them in jail. And Sheffy was supposed to, I mean, he'd been like laid up. He'd been in bed for a week.
They beat him pretty
They
good.
beat him bad. And so he got up and he went to the courtroom, and it was the case before those men were all to be tried for beating, and he didn't press charges on them. And the judge said, look, Bob, they said, look, Bob, this is an open and shut case. We've got eyewitnesses. You look like you've been drugged behind a horse, you know. Basically, we're gonna deal with these guys. This ain't gonna happen again. He said, no, they just did what came natural to their nature.
Good
He
day.
said they hate God, and I mean, he was a unique dude.
Yeah.
I mean, unique.
Well, just you telling that, the guy that did the acting in that sounds like he did a great job in the acting.
That old movie's old. It's put out by Bob Jones
Yeah.
University. I mean,
It was cheap anyway. It didn't have.
when I
big
watched the
budget.
movie, I preached in Virginia, probably not 2 hours from where Bob lived. And so I went to his grave, and I went to the church that was named after
You
him.
didn't get no anointing, did you?
I didn't.
Okay, good.
I didn't feel the spirit. I didn't get a Ouija board out or anything. I
All
didn't.
right.
So, but I went there just to see where he lived, and so I'm reading in the book that he lived in Staffordville, Virginia. And so I looked, and Staffordville is a town that no longer exists, but it's right there by the memorial church that is named after him, the campgrounds where they held camp meetings. And they still have camp meetings there to this day at that campground. And anyways, it names a lot of towns in that area that he preached in. And so I got on Google Maps the other day, and I was like, oh, yeah, I drove through there. I drove through Wytheville and Wythe County, and I drove through Bluefield. And I would like to go back, now that I've read the book, I would like to go back and see if Andrew's Chapel is there, Peter's Chapel is there, the churches that he was instrumental in getting off the ground, if they still exist 120 years after his death.
Yeah, that'd be cool to see. Yeah, I got to get that book for sure. So,
Saint in the Wilderness by Jess Carr.
What is it?
The Saint of the Wilderness.
Okay.
And he was a peculiar dude. I mean, I don't want to paint him out as be some, everybody would have loved this guy. He was weird. He stopped a whole wagon train because there was a beetle upside down in the road, and he didn't want to get ran over. And he said,
when you say
a beetle, not
bug.
Yeah, I'm not talking about John Lennon. I'm talking about a bug. It was a tussle beetle was overturned in the road, and he stopped. It was stuck in a wagon rut. And he was like, they're sure to get killed. There's no way these wagons will get through here. He'd pick a turtle up that was upside down and move him out of the road. He loved nature, and he got onto a guy for keeping fish that were too small to clean. He said, let them go. Let them grow up. You can catch them again when they're big enough to eat. He wasn't like a vegetarian, but he wasn't for wasting stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, he sounded like a unique guy. Oh, man. Well, listen, brother, we've been going close to 2 hours now.
Yep. I don't think we've solved any problems either.
Probably not, but it's been fun, though.
Yep.
It's been good. You got any final words you want to tell anybody? words of encouragement?
Just keep going. And there's nothing wrong with being popular. There's nothing wrong with being famous. Just don't forget where you came from. That's kind of who you work for.
No matter who you are, just take the low road.
Yeah, take the low road. If you end up famous, don't let it be because you was trying to get there.
Yeah.
Try to be faithful. Lord will make you famous if He wants you famous.
Amen to
He
that.
that is faithful with little will be trusted with much.
Amen.
And
Amen
the
to
worst
that.
thing you can do is get all your inheritance given to you. You'll end up in a hog trough feeding pigs and have to go home.
Yep, exactly.
So,
Well, this has been another fun podcast of the uneducated and untrained pastor. If it was King James Version, it'd be the ignorant and the unlearned. So, but just remember, the key to all of that is not whether you have the education or you have the training or anything like that, or you have the popularity. The question is, have you been spending time with Christ? So I'm your host, Ronnie Qualls. My co-host today is Harold Smith, and we're going to sign out till next time. God bless each one of you.